Perfect. I see more and more joining in the lobby. We've got kind of an action-packed agenda today. So in the interest of time, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. I see some familiar names and many new names that perhaps haven't joined us before. We've got a special event planned for you today where we'll be mixing a little bit of work and some fun together. But before I get started, I want to just cover a couple of housekeeping items. Today's presentation is packed with information about Davenport Group, who we are and what we do, information about Dell's latest addition to the mid-range storage portfolio, which is PowerStore, and information about how to make some of the best ribs you've ever tasted. If at any point during today's presentations you have questions, we encourage and welcome you to ask away, either in the chat or, feel free to come off mute. Today is an event planned for you, the customer. So we want you to get as much out of this as possible. Feel free to ask questions. Just to kind of recap about today's agenda, we're going to start off with some introductions of who we are and introduce our thought leaders for today's conversation. We'll then dive into why we're excited about PowerStore and our value to you in supporting data center initiatives. And then we'll cover some real-life use cases and business outcomes from our previous customers' implementations. I guess without further ado, let's get started. My name is Connor Dry. I'm an account executive with Davenport Group. Joining me today is Brian Moran, one of our senior sales engineers. Brian has spent over a decade working with customers where he has been able to architect end-to-end data center solutions that support your most mission-critical applications and workloads. Hey, Brian, why don't you chime in and say hi?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Brian Moran. I've been with Davenport Group. I started beginning of 2017, and prior to that, I spent time at both Dell and EMC. And so that entire time has really been focused on designing not only storage solutions, but as Connor said, really end-to-end data center solutions. And very excited to talk about what PowerStore is, what's new, if you haven't seen the latest announcements, and go from there. So thanks, Connor.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Also joining us is our special guest, Mr. Andy Boderman. Andy is a well-seasoned, no pun intended, culinary enthusiast who takes the art of cooking, grilling, and smoking to the next level. I don't want to steal Andy's thunder too much, so I'll pass it off to him to make a quick intro.
Cool. Yeah, guys, super excited to be here. Of course, it is National Barbecue Day today. So there's no place I'd rather be than with you guys. We're going to cook up some awesome ribs. These are Duroc pork, super awesome. We're going to run through how to trim them up, season them, run through the whole cook. So I'm very excited. At the end of this, we'll get you guys all confident and ready to make some of the best ribs you've ever had.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. I know I'm super excited about that, so we'll make sure to walk through this pretty quick. Perfect. Well, so let's chat about who Davenport Group is and how best we support our customers through the many different initiatives that you see on this slide. Simply put, we're an organization of customer-first technology advocates where we help our customers realize their infrastructure and business objectives. We originally started out in 2001, specializing in a local storage company called Compellent. Over time, we worked with our customers to continue and expand our solution offerings. And in 2011, Dell acquired Compellent, which put us into an exciting position. As one of the top resellers for the Compellent line, we now had a wide range of enterprise products that we could support our customers with. At that time, we decided to go 100% all in with Dell hardware, which basically made us a tactical force for our customers. In turn, in 2016, Dell acquired EMC, and at that point, it further opened up our offerings to support more of our customers' workloads, things like more primary storage, file level workloads, backup, and even cloud strategies. Now, I know today's topic covers just one of the bullet points that you see mentioned here under solution focus. But what I want you to get out of this slide is that we can help you out in many different areas, including cloud hosting, managed services, and cybersecurity. Our engineers are truly top-notch, and we have continued to expand our engineering organization to support you, your most mission-critical applications, and support your business as a partner. Now, to get into the meat and bones of the conversation, no pun intended, I'm about to throw it over to Brian Moran, where he'll go over some of the specifics of why PowerStore is so great. But before that, I want to say why I'm excited about this platform. We're really good at storage, and we've been lucky enough to have experience in all lines of Dell's storage portfolio since we started. PowerStore is Dell's latest and greatest, and I like to consider it the spiritual successor to many different lines that both Dell and EMC have offered in the past. PowerStore took what some of the previous platforms did best and then put them into a single appliance. You'll notice things like if you have Compellent today, some of the ways that it gets data put into the right place, or even Confederate, where you can have multiple storage devices operating in a single pool. You'll notice that the system itself can leverage both block and file level workloads like EMC's Unity Array. It's truly an incredible platform. What I think you'll get the most out of this system is that the architecture is adaptable, where you can grow capacity either by scaling up or scaling out. The array, it's highly intelligent. It has algorithms built into it that support high data reduction ratios, but it also includes things like predictive health scoring and capacity planning, and it even has security features built in. And then finally, why I'm so excited about this platform is Dell has put a lot of investment into the PowerStore, has even gone from now it's on revision 3 with 3.5 coming out soon. So some interesting software advantages in it. What that means is this is a platform that's going to last you throughout its entire life cycle plus some. As your workloads continue to change or grow, you can upgrade this system without a forklift and no additional licensing needed. Now, I know I just mentioned a ton of information about Davenport Group. You saw some of the things that we work with on the previous slides, and then, I don't want to give too much of a spoiler before Brian gets started, but I want to just open up the floor. Are there any questions that I haven't seen in chat, or any questions to come off mute? Perfect. Well, without further ado, Brian, the floor is yours.
And thanks, Connor. And again, just to reiterate what Connor has said, if you see something on a slide, or if I say something that piques your interest, please feel free to, type a question in the chat, or come off mute. So let's jump in. So I'm going to spend the next several minutes just kind of diving deeper into some of the kind of feature functionality that Connor just explained. And so to start off, Connor mentioned that PowerStore is Dell Technologies' newest mid-range storage platform, but it's really been designed with like an enterprise feature set. So not only can it support, block workloads, like, a lot of the folks on this call maybe are familiar with SE or Compellent storage, especially if you've been a Davenport Group customer for a while. And so that was a block only, like iSCSI fiber channel type product, but also has file protocol support. So CIFS, NFS, we've had customers, that have been running Windows VMs for a long time on top of block storage. When it comes time to do like a Windows update to that file server, it can be very disruptive to, the rest of the environment that is trying to access that data. So being able to natively support both file and block workloads from the same platform has been great for a lot of customers, specifically coming from, SE storage. People coming from like VNX or Unity, maybe you're familiar with how that technology, has worked in the past. And you'll see a lot of similarities on, the best of breed of different functions from, EqualLogic, SC Storage, Extreme IO, Unity, all of those different, storage engineers coming together to really design this new product. A couple of other things I want to highlight on this: NVMe over Fabric. All right, so when PowerStore first launched, I don't think NVMe over Fabric was a possibility, but just with newer versions of the PowerStore operating system, future releases or newer releases that have come out, they've added additional functionality. So if you're not familiar with NVMe over Fabric, take a especially if you're already running PowerStore. I think I saw a couple of current PowerStore users already are joining the call with us today. Take a look and see, because you may be able to implement these protocols now with the switches and NICs and HBAs that are already in place. And really what this allows you to do is achieve higher IOPS at lower CPU utilization. And so the fact that PowerStore was able to add NVMe over Fiber Channel or NVMe over Ethernet, I think has been a huge benefit. Another thing that, a typical conversation, or a lot of the folks I work with have, mostly Windows virtual machines running on some sort of hypervisor, maybe a handful of Linux workloads. But containers, really haven't taken off as much in kind of like the mid-market space, or, the smaller business space. A client I was working with just a few months ago, they were 100% Windows environment running on VMware. They upgraded their ERP application, and the ERP vendor actually forced their hand into implementing containers to support the new version of their ERP platform. And so what that meant for them was, now they had to figure out how to manage Red Hat, Kubernetes, all of these new technologies, but they had PowerStore. And so PowerStore has a, Kubernetes plugin. So, right away, they're able to provide persistent storage to these new workloads that weren't planned right out the gate. So, a lot of functionality baked into the product that, maybe you're not necessarily needing to leverage on day one, but this particular team wasn't planning to deploy containers themselves. Their internal, applications teams weren't looking to deploy containers. It was kind of forced upon them. And so, those kinds of changes I think are coming. And so a platform like PowerStore just makes sure that, you are prepared for what's to come. So I mentioned, PowerStore is a mid-range storage platform, but is built on a lot of the, same foundations that go into enterprise storage arrays. So like if you're familiar with like PowerMax, which is the Dell Technologies like high-end storage platform, things like, active controllers. And one specific thing I want to call out, I know there's a lot on the slide, is the dynamic resiliency engine. So, a lot of people that have been running storage for a long time are going to be familiar with RAID and RAID groups. But with the dynamic resiliency engine, it's completely done away with traditional RAID. It allows you to deploy the system with the equivalency of like a, 1 drive or 2 drive fault tolerance level. But instead of having things like hot spares, it'll have reserve space across the drives. And so what that allows is, one, the ability to leverage the capacity and performance of all drives in the system. So not having things like, hot spares especially when we're talking about NVMe SSDs, but also extremely quick rebuilds. In a little bit, I'll talk about drive sizes, in particular or specific configurations, but the largest drive available in a PowerStore today is 15.36 terabytes, right? So if you think about a 15 terabyte drive in a traditional RAID group, and if one of those drives has an issue, think about the days that it would take to do a rebuild. PowerStore is designed in such a way with the dynamic resiliency engine that same rebuild is now capped at 5 hours. Any drive size that is put into PowerStore, it is designed in such a way that a complete data rebuild can be done in under 5 hours. So, talking about RAID, a lot of folks are used to, whenever it comes time to expand storage, having to add disk in disk groups, right? So if you've got like, let's say an 8+1 disk group, you have to add 9 drives at a time, and that can be pretty expensive, especially if you're only needing a couple of terabytes of additional capacity for a new workload. One of the things I love about PowerStore is the way that it can scale. So here in the graphic, you see the 2 redundant controllers and a tray of drives. So, when we look at the hardware, you'll see that this is actually just in a 2U footprint. Drives can be added one drive at a time. PowerStore launched in 2020, and we have worked with folks that have deployed PowerStore that have been running it for almost 3 years now. That have had, they've added 1-2 drives at a time. So that makes, drive capacity adds extremely flexible, and, quite a bit easier than saying having to budget, for an additional 9 drives or a disk pack or even a full shelf. So the system itself can hold up to 25 drives in that 2U head unit. But if you max out that capacity, it can grow by scaling up with the addition of additional trays of disk behind it. So all that, very similar to how, you would scale up a, SE storage array or a Unity just by daisy chaining trays of disk. One big difference between Unity and SE, though, is those arrays used a 12 gig SAS loop for those expansion enclosures. PowerStore, with the latest launch, has 100 gig NVMe connectivity. So it's truly NVMe end to end from the bottom expansion tray. And then if you're running NVMe over Fabric, it's NVMe end to end, from the host all the way through the solution. Now, we work with folks that, let's say you have a IT team that is shared across multiple business units, right? So I see this a lot in government, right? So maybe you have a single team that is responsible for like a police or sheriff, as well as like a city hall or health department, right? So it's the same folks, but you're working with these organizations within your your government that has different budgets, and sometimes those budgets dictate physical separation of IT resources, right? So you have to be able to say, okay, these budget dollars went to this particular asset. So with PowerStore, you are able to take multiple PowerStore appliances and cluster them together, keeping the volumes physically separated from each other on their own unique appliances, but manage it all together as a large single federated solution. Now, I want to call out, you see these capacity numbers, like almost 19 petabytes of effective capacity with that little asterisk. That little asterisk down at the bottom says, assuming a 4-to-1 data reduction ratio. So what that means is PowerStore does leverage inline deduplication and compression. It's always on. It's not per volume. It doesn't need to be turned on, turned off, configured, tuned, or anything. It's just always going to be running for all workloads on the system. There's no performance overhead because of the way that the code was written, where the data is deduplicated before it's written to disk. And so, simple math, let's say you have 10 terabytes of physical flash after, your 1 or 2 drive data reduction, or excuse me, data parity. That 10 terabytes of flash can become 40 terabytes of usable capacity in whatever your front end workload is. Now, there are some caveats with that. And you see on the slide, it says guaranteed. There is actually a 2-page document. It's a contract that we send to you, you sign, we get it on file with Dell, where Dell will make this right if you're not achieving this kind of 4-to-1 data reduction. But with that, there are a couple of caveats. Not all types of data are going to deduplicate or compress at the same rate. So things like video, audio, PDF, image, anything that's already compressed or encrypted are specifically called out. And so, at Davenport Group, our engineering team is going to spend time with your team understanding, your specific data sets to make sure that we are appropriately sizing the solution based on, what you expect or should expect to see in your environment. To give you an example, we have worked with a couple of engineering firms where we knew going in, because of the type of data that they were storing in their environments, that they were not going to see very high data reduction ratios. We've actually sized some of these arrays at 1-to-1, not expecting any type of data reduction at all. And these customers are still seeing, 1.5, almost 2-to-1 savings on the data. So again, that just goes back to, Davenport Group partners with your organization to make sure that we really understand your data set, to make sure that, you are going to see the effective capacity that, we kind of together collaborate and decide is appropriate for your organization. On the flip side of that, I was working with a software developer last year, and because of the nature of their business, they were running, I think, 400 plus virtual machines, but the virtual machines were all nearly identical, just with minor patch variations of their software or operating systems to test. And they were seeing upwards of 26 to 1 on their particular install. So really it's dependent on your data, but that's why, Dell has said, hey, this 4 to 1 guarantee, and it is just a 2-page document. It's very simple to read and understand. It's not full of legalese. So with that, I'm going to dive into just some more of the kind of feature functionality. And again, please, if anyone has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or come off mute. I think Connor is going to be kind of monitoring the chat. So Connor, if you see something in the chat, please, stop me and we'll make sure your questions get addressed. But so, one of the things that comes up is, I've been running X storage solution. Now I want to look at PowerStore. How do I migrate my data? There are technologies in place like storage vMotion that make migrations very, very simple, but not everyone is licensed for storage vMotion, right? It only comes with like vSphere standard and above. Or maybe you have like a physical workload, right? So like volumes attached to physical servers that, storage vMotion isn't a possibility. What's PowerStore 1.0, the original, release of PowerStore did was had the seamless import option where you could attach via iSCSI from your source storage directly to PowerStore and import storage that way, right? So you're no longer looking at these like painful data migrations, especially for physical workloads or any type of environment where storage vMotion is not a possibility, right? So just a way to import from, on the slide you see Compellent, EqualLogic, ExtremeIO, VNX, Unity. So that was all available on day one. Here in a second, I'm going to show you what's been added since. But to continue this, right out the gate, things like replication, what was included for block workloads, and it was asynchronous replication. We've had folks where they needed synchronous or active-active type setups. That was possible via the addition of something called a metro node. So if you've been around EMC technology for a while, you may be familiar with a solution called vPlex. vPlex has been simplified and is now, Metronode. I think vPlex is still around, but Metronode is kind of the future iteration of vPlex and is still available for PowerStore as well as like Unity storage and maybe some third-party arrays. But again, all of that was, what came out with PowerStore out the gate. Fast forward a couple of years, and PowerStore had 2.0, 3.0, 3.5 was just announced within the last several days. And so you can see, not everyone had Dell storage that's migrating to PowerStore, right? So they added the ability to migrate from NetApp using this same kind of import functionality, right? So you're not having to do host-based migration. It's directly from NetApp source to PowerStore. Some of the big things were file system replication, right? So I talked about moving your Windows VM file servers to PowerStore to be native file on the array. Well, at launch, those file servers could not be replicated via firmware updates. Now they can. And then on the synchronous active-active functionality, Metro volume has come out, and so that we've already seen that be deployed as well. So native functionality within the array for synchronous active-active access using PowerStore. Today it's in a VMware only environment, but I think that will be expanded as well here in the future. So again, any questions, please feel free to stop me anytime. So security comes up just about in every conversation. It's top of mind for everyone these days, especially with ransomware being in the news constantly. But PowerStore was designed using the NIST design framework, right? So right out the gate, on day one, things like data at rest encryption, always on. There's not a way to disable it. Initially, the keys were managed by the array itself, so there wasn't a requirement for any kind of third-party or external key manager. Well, in 3.0, they added the ability to use a external key manager. So if you already have one in place that you're using, to manage keys in your broader environment, that's now a possibility as well. You can still use the native key manager, But that array theft protection, that's like, if someone were to come physically take the entire array, now if your key manager is separate from the array, that data cannot be retrieved. On the certifications, with the new PowerStore release, there's the FIPS 140-2, right? So that's come up a handful of times that the PowerStore is now FIPS 140-2 certified end to end, the full PowerStore solution. And you see this is 3.0. What was just announced in 3.5 is multi-factor authentication. So this is another thing that comes up very regularly in conversation with folks that are being mandated to implement some sort of MFA technology by their cyber insurance companies, right? So if you go to renew your cyber insurance, or even looking for cyber insurance if you don't already have it, a lot of the policies are now updating to mandate the use of some sort of MFA. Well, with the 3.5 release, PowerStore Manager can now be protected behind a secure ID, which is the RSA multi-factor solution. And just since I don't have anywhere else to put it, I'm going to go ahead and talk about it now. Another major release in the 3.5, I think is going to be huge, is for data domain customers. So if you have data domain in your environment, and if you're not familiar with it, it's a purpose-built backup appliance. So it's really dedicated backup storage. But if you have data domain and you have PowerStore, in 3.5, there is a way to automate the movement of snapshots, or directly integrate via policy PowerStore snapshots moved over to data domain without any kind of like third-party orchestration software, right? So it's not like a backup through hosts. It's a brand new feature that was just announced in the 3.5 release, so it's not live yet. But I think it's huge for folks that are running both PowerStore and data domain. So Cloud IQ. If you're not familiar with Cloud IQ and you have any Dell Enterprise solutions in your environment, you should be using Cloud IQ. It is a completely free software as a service solution hosted by Dell Technologies, as long as you have an active support contract. So first launched, I think, in 2016 with Unity. And so at launch, it only worked with Unity. Over time, it has been added to more and more of the Dell Technologies portfolio, the enterprise portfolio at least, to now include, I think, every storage product in the portfolio, including PowerStore, as well as the data protection portfolio, Power Switch or Dell Networking, even Power Edge, so the servers. And so what Cloud IQ is it's a cloud portal that can give you things like health scores, security scores, predictive analytics, and there's a mobile app too. So if your systems are phoning home to Dell and you have an active support contract, let's say something like a hard drive fails, right, in a server or your Power Edge, and it's in a colo, and you just aren't aware, Cloud IQ with the phone app will send you a push notification that one, the issue has been detected, two, a case has been created on your behalf, and three, a replacement component's been dispatched. So it's very slick, and again, it's completely free as long as you have an active support contract. I think it's cloudiq.dell.com. So again, if you have servers, switches, storage from Dell, highly recommend taking a look if you don't already have it set up. Okay, so now that I've talked kind of a little bit about some of the features and functionalities, I want to talk about, let's say you do migrate to PowerStore, what comes next? Data migrations are painful, right? I mean, I've worked with folks where, they'll implement a new solution and it takes months sometimes, for all the planning and whatnot that goes into migrating, from current solution to next solution. The goal with PowerStore is once your data is on PowerStore, that you can seamlessly upgrade the environment from generation to generation without any kind of disruptive upgrades or downtime. And by that, I mean, so PowerStore launched in 2000, and then, in 2020, and then last year in 2022, they released the second generation of PowerStore hardware. So, initially there was like a PowerStore 1000. Now there's a PowerStore 1200. And so what this anytime upgrade program allows you to do is upgrade the controllers from one generation to the next generation anytime in the contract, right? So if you've had a PowerStore 1000 for 6 months, and then the PowerStore 1200 comes out, And let's say there's something in the PowerStore 1200, like it does support more IOPS, it'll lower CPU utilization. You are able to take advantage of this program to go ahead and upgrade the controllers in place without having to migrate the data, without having to put in an entire new system and then look at seamless import or storage free motion, right? So not only can you go to the next generation, you can also go to a higher end model. All right, so let's say you have a PowerStore 1200 today and needs change, right? So the PowerStore 1200, let's say it was sized to support just your server workload, and now you want to deploy a virtual desktop environment. And because of the number of users, it might saturate the performance capabilities of the 1200 that you're in today. You can upgrade from the 1200 to the 3200. So doing controller upgrades as well as so next generation and higher model all through this program. The other option is completely scale out. So let's use that same scenario. Let's say you want to keep your server environment segregated from your virtual desktop environment. With the Anytime Upgrade program, you can add a second appliance, manage them together in that federated cluster, as kind of a single PowerStore solution, but keep your server workloads physically segregated from your virtual desktop workloads. And again, big call out. I know there are other programs out in the industry that might sound similar, but some of the big call outs here, use it anytime, right? You don't have to wait, until your 3-year warranty is up to do this type of upgrade, and you don't have to renew your support at the when you do this upgrade either, right? So if you implement a PowerStore on day one with a 5-year contract, new hardware is going to come out, every 2 to 3 years. You can upgrade your controllers during that initial 5-year program, and you don't have to kick out your support like another 3 to 5 years. I think it's compared to other programs, it's significantly a more cost-effective or just better model in my opinion. So I've touched on the 4-to-1 data reduction guarantee. I've touched on the anytime upgrades. Another thing that Dell Technologies has done is this 3-year satisfaction guarantee as a part of the Future Proof loyalty program. And this is not specific to PowerStore, but what that 3-year satisfaction guarantee is, or basically what it says is, if you run PowerStore for a year and it's just not living up to expectations, of course, Davenport Group and our Dell Technologies partners are going to try to make it right. But if it's just not going to work, there is a way to do like a prorated return through the satisfaction guarantee. I mean, that's how much faith that they are putting behind this product is, it's going to work. And, if for whatever reason it doesn't, there is a prorated money back guarantee. So quick look at the hardware specifics themselves. So I mentioned before, it starts off as a 2U appliance. So up to 21 or 25 capacity drives in the front, depending on the model. And the minimum configuration is 6 drives. So we have a lot of folks that we worked with that only have 6 drives in their initial footprint. So 6 of the 1.92 terabyte drives gets you about 7 terabytes of usable flash before data reduction, right? So if you're thinking 4-to-1, that's 28 terabytes in the smallest footprint. In this same 2U, we've worked with folks that have deployed solutions that deliver over 500 terabytes of effective capacity in this 2U using larger drives without having to look at expansion shelves. So think about how much physical space your current solution is taking, especially if it's in like a co-location, and how you're being charged for rack space and power, and being able to shrink that into this 2U footprint. On the back, I know it's kind of busy, but just tons of flexibility. So you see the 2 redundant controllers, and those controllers can be hot swapped one at a time. So if you're doing an anytime upgrade, it's not a downtime procedure. You just slide out node A, pop in the new one, slide out node B, pop in the new one. But each node is going to have Ethernet connectivity, right? So either 10 gig or 25 gig on every array. But then in addition to that, we can add things like up to 32 gig fiber channel or 100 gig Ethernet right? So if you're doing NVMe over TCP, we can do 100 gig, all the way to the hosts, or just more 10 gig or 25 gig ports, right? So that's useful if you're doing things like, let's say you want to run file workloads, iSCSI workloads, replication traffic, just to have the ports to segregate that traffic across different ports on the system. So lots of flexibility with what we can do with I/O. Every system does have out-of-band management, and then the expansion ports are how we would daisy chain additional trays if you were to need to scale up. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Connor, but I wanted to see if anyone else had any questions or comments before I do.
Yeah. Hey, Brian. We actually got a question in chat from Dominic with what kind of assessments does Davenport Group offer to help us know if the performance upgrade from a current hardware solution is worth the cost, such as an ROI evaluation?
Yeah, so typically whenever we are talking about storage solutions, what we are going to do is recommend a live optics assessment. So if you have been around Dell for any length of time, maybe you've heard of live optics or DPAC prior to that. But really, it is a analysis tool that's going to look at your environment. So it'll measure CPU memory utilization at the host level, network utilization, which we actually use to size things like replication bandwidth, but it also looks at storage IOPS, storage capacity, latency, and so with those numbers we can really design an appropriately sized solution for your environment. And then there are some financial tools that we can do to take a look at what a capex cost would be versus opex. And there are even some consumption models available as well, right? So if it doesn't make sense to implement to write a check for a new PowerStore, there are consumption models, right? So a pay-as-you-grow model is absolutely available with PowerStore. I do actually see Keith's comment. So I think we are a little limited on time today, but I would absolutely love to set up time to do a demo. So Davenport Group, we have two PowerStore arrays in our lab. So we have a 500T and a 3000T in our own lab, so we can do some hands-on or very customized demos for you at any time if you want to see the interface. Or if you just have other specific questions. So myself or one of my counterparts across the country would certainly able to set that up with you.
Most certainly, Keith. And I'll tell you a little bit of a spoiler alert. There may be some incentive for us to reach back out and chat through a demo. We'll talk about that later on in the presentation.
Great. I'm going to turn it over to you, Connor.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. So the next part is the PowerStore has a ton of features. And luckily, Davenport Group was all in from the very beginning of PowerStore. And we've had the opportunity to work with some really cool customers doing really cool things. Since we've answered the question, I want to highlight and talk about two customers that really stood out to us with their engagements on PowerStore. The first one I want to talk about is a children's hospital that we just recently implemented PowerStore earlier this year. I think the majority of you on the phone know that between 2020 to 2023, there was a strain on IT environments due to COVID, even operating in a during COVID and post-COVID world. This children's hospital realized that in order to maintain and be competitive, while also kind of augmenting their services so that they can best support their end users, they needed to implement a telehealth program. They weren't able to do so. They were running SC Compellent line that they had purchased in 2015. It didn't meet the performance that they needed. They needed to grow capacity, and they were running out of rack space with the other implementations they were working on. After working with Davenport Group, we were able to size an environment with PowerStore where we took their storage footprint down from 12U to just 2U, just one PowerStore controller. In turn, we doubled their effective capacity from 30 terabytes to 60 terabytes, and that still gives them so much room to grow and expand as necessary, either scaling up or scaling out. And from a performance standpoint, they were leveraging just a little bit of flash with most of their capacity landing on spinning drives. Their requirements for this new implementation and their production environment was about 10,000 IO. Within that 2U PowerStore appliance, the applications are able to see up to 80,000 IOPS of performance on that system. This was a really cool customer and a fun project because the work that we did directly influenced the community, where children are able to access health care that they need without travel time. I mean, they could be an hour and a half away and simply log in. It also gave them a self-service portal where they're able to look at bills, look at test documents, x-rays, everything, and that's all landing on the PowerStore. That was a really fun project we worked on. The second example I want to highlight is a local government that we worked with in 2021. Just like the Children's Hospital, during COVID, they were actually seeing a growth in population, but many people working from home and remote. They had to overhaul their platform. It was also aged. It was also slow. It wasn't able to support departmental growth. It wasn't able to support the citizens. And after working with Davenport Group, we sized out the environment. In the way that we work, you heard Brian talk about it, we go with an in-depth kind of data-driven analysis to show you exactly what data reduction you should expect. But there's still that contract for a 4-to-1 where if you don't get that, Dell will guarantee that you should be receiving that. The customer was not seeing the 4-to-1 that Dell had guaranteed. In turn, Davenport Group actually worked with Dell on the customer's behalf and was able to secure additional drive capacity to make up that difference at no charge to the customer. This is also a fun project because this local government later on wanted to build disaster recovery across their environment. And in turn, they were able to implement true active-active with zero RPO and zero RTO. I mean, this was a really fun project because the customer was able to upgrade in place non-disruptively, and they were able to build resiliency across their clusters so that the citizens, staff, and departments had consistent access to their tools. Now, I know that was a lot of information, but I think it's important to summarize, again, why we're so excited about the PowerStore and how it could apply to you and your environment. Both Davenport Group and our customers love PowerStore because it's performance. I mean, with end-to-end NVMe, you get the performance that your applications need. You can scale dynamically based on how your workload shifts over time. You can run any workload you want with a unified block and file architecture and can even support vVols. You can modernize continuously with data in place upgrades, no downtime. Dell Anytime Upgrades program where you can get the upgraded to newest generation or upgraded performance model or scale out. And then finally, Dell's guarantee of both 4-to-1 data reduction and their 3-year satisfaction guarantee. The last thing that I want to cover is how Davenport Group helps support our customers with PowerStore. Although PowerStore is a feature-rich and robust platform, having a partner by your side to support your environment across its life cycle has become necessary for many customers. And that's why we've expanded our engineering practice to include managed services on PowerStore. We know that everybody's environment is unique to them. It's all a little bit different, and that's why we're able to customize our managed services unique to you. In this case, we have 3 different flavors of managed services for PowerStore, which we'll look at on the next slide. Our engineers are also entirely certified to administrate PowerStore. I mean, we'll reach out proactively, share best practices and methods to review Any major outages before they happen, we'll even help escalate, and we provide full documentation in your own self-service portal. I mean, at the end of the day, Davenport Group wants to help support you with your most mission-critical workloads, and I would say most importantly, give you time back to focus on important initiatives and business objectives. If we look at those three different offerings, we start off with our Advise platform. Now, this is our beginning design with Advise. You get immediate access to a dedicated technical account manager. This is a person, one-to-one, works directly with you, an email away, a name that's familiar, don't have to go through a queue, you know this person. If there's any issues that we see going on in the PowerStore, we'll help escalate that with our contacts at Dell and help remediate issues. But we'll also provide quarterly health checks proactively. We'll reach out to you, sync with you every 3 months, just walk through how the system is performing. Notice if there's any firmware that's out of date, if there's any patch upgrades that need to be done, and then plan for those accordingly. That way your system's always up to date, it's always secure, and you can make sure that it's performant as possible. The second part of that is some of our customers, like Brian was mentioning, migration can be a pain, setting up replication can be a pain. We also include some block hours with our Advise and Assist offering. Remote block hours can be used for anything within our scope, such as those migration policies or even setting up things with a network. If it's something that we support, those block hours can be used for it. And then finally, for our customers that want a truly hands-off, fully managed white glove treatment, we are introducing Davenport Group Care Manage, which is if we are the administrator, we are your storage admin. You have unlimited access to remote systems admins. We'll monitor the platform, how it's performing, send you alerts on capacity planning. We'll help configure and deploy systems. If something is going on with it, we'll troubleshoot it. And then finally, everything that is done on the system, as well as project management or tips on best practices, all of that will be uploaded into a self-service customer portal, where you'll have full access of everything done on that system. And that mostly wraps it up. Now, again, I know we went over a ton of information, and I think everybody's excited to get to the next part where Andy will take over and show us how to make some of the best ribs. But I want to pause for a second. Any questions that have come up, anything that you saw previously that gets you excited about the platform? All right. I think we can move on to the next one. So if you are interested, and Keith, this one goes out to you, the little bit of a spoiler I gave you earlier. If you're interested in talking more about PowerStore, talking about our managed services and how we can help support your environment, or maybe even something different that you saw on our second slide about who Davenport Group is, could be VDI, cybersecurity initiatives, cloud strategies, you name it. If we can meet up with you sometime by Friday, June 23rd, you'll actually be entered in for a chance to win a RecTech RT700 pellet grill. Now, I've always been a gas guy, always used Weber. I actually got a pellet grill about a year ago, and I will tell you, it is incredible. It's an absolute game changer. Everything I've made on that, from meats to even vegetables, it's way better. So it's a great grill as kind of an incentive and to say thank you for the time today. Let's sync up and chat through. Keith, we could do that demo or even talk about some of the new features coming out in PowerStore OS 3.5. Awesome. Well, I think without further ado, I don't want to, delay it any further because I know, Andy, I am personally very excited to hear it from a master
Awesome.
like yourself to walk through some of those grills, looking at the ribs. So I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, thank you guys. So what we are working with today, what you guys received, will be Duroc spare ribs. When I say the word Duroc, Duroc is a breed of hogs that started in New England right around 1800. They're really known for incredible flavor as far as any sort of barbecue is concerned, pork chops, all that. You'll notice there's a little bit deeper kind of red color to the pork instead of like almost like translucent, more pink color that you see with some of the commodity style pork that you'll see at Costco and Walmart and all that stuff. And nothing's wrong with that stuff either. It is also fantastic. If you're smoking pork, it's a good day and it's always going to be awesome. So, but this is a little something special. These are a little bit smaller. You'll notice when you got them than a typical size. So for shipping purposes, they went with a little bit smaller cut for us on this, which is great. But you got 2 racks, so everybody should be able to eat some. When I said these are spare ribs, so there is essentially 3 different types of pork ribs that you're going to run into. You're going to run into what's called a full spare, which is this. You're also going to have St. Louis cut, which is what we're going to make this into, and then baby back ribs, and everybody knows that because Chili's, right? So the baby back ribs, I get asked all the time, like, what is the difference between all of the different rib types? So baby back ribs are actually located further up on the hog, closer to the spine. So if you take the full kind of section of rib, the baby back's going to come out of the top. Now it's a meatier rib. However, it's not as renowned for its flavor like the spare ribs are. The reason being there's more marbling, more intramuscular fat that's occurring in the spare ribs. And when I say marbling and intramuscular fat, I'm talking about the fine little white striations that you see in the meat, not the fat that's on the meat, but the stuff that actually is within that. So then we have spare ribs. So the spare rib comes down and it includes what's called a brisket flap. Some people, breastbone, things like that. If you've ever had rib tips are what the brisket flap is essentially made from. It's this flap on the other side, and then right underneath it is the rib tips. So you can definitely just take this and put it on your smoker, your grill, even in the oven, totally whole. You don't need to do what I'm going to show you how to do. But if you're interested, because a lot of times if you go to the store, you'll see spare ribs are maybe sometimes cheaper per pound. And then you can make rib tips with them later. The downside of having rib tips attached to your ribs is they have that cartilage that's in there. And if you've ever had rib tips and you just went and chewed on one, you'll notice there's like almost a little plastic feeling thing in there. Totally edible. You can still eat through it and around it, but it is a little bit harder to eat. So we're going to make these really clean, easy, be able to bite them right off the bone. So that basically is the 3 different types of ribs. Are there any questions so far? Just going to give it a second. Okay. So, seasoning. I want to talk a little bit about this before we actually get into trimming. You guys should have gotten my favorite, Meat Church. For those of you who are unaware, Meat Church is out of Waxahachie, Texas. They do amazing rubs. I have been an ambassador for this company for 3 years now. It's awesome. I used to make all my own seasonings, and you can still do that, and it's really fun. But I noticed that there's this whole other level of like premium seasonings that you can buy. And by the time you go out and get all the ingredients, it's going to cost you a lot more when you can just spend, 11, 12 bucks on a bottle of this, and it lasts you a whole bunch of cooks. So you guys got my two favorites to layer on ribs. Barbecue is all about layering flavors. So we're going to use both on this one piece of meat, but we're not going to use all of them in these ribs. So you guys will have some time to experiment with these later on. So anything you want to put them on, vegetables, fantastic. Chicken, amazing. Any other barbecue that you're doing, pork chops, anything you can think of. Experiment with these seasonings. They're really good. The Gospel is kind of an all-purpose barbecue. I really, really like it. It's a great base layer for just about anything. And then Honey Hog, this is a little bit sweeter. So for me personally, I like my ribs to have a little bit of sweetness to them. This is where this comes in. It actually has granulated honey in here. So you get a really, really nice bite. So I put that one on top. All right.
Hey, Andy, there was a
Yeah.
comment in the chat. If you could pan your camera down a little bit, I think it's hard to see what you're doing.
Oh, yeah. We're going to get into the trimming portion here. So we're going to actually pan down and zoom in a little bit. Okay. So here we see the entire spare rib. And this is what would be considered the top side or the presentation side. Most of the trimming that we're going to do, we're going to come at this from the back side. So this is that brisket flap I was talking about. It's kind of a weird little piece of meat. You can certainly, again, keep it on there. But I like to take it off because this tends to overcook and it kind of dries out and it's not a great bite. So I just come in with a boning knife, nice and sharp, come through and just kind of pull that back. Now, if you want to, if you're really going to get into it and you have a grinder, something like that, this is great meat for doing up sausages, grinding up for different stuff. You can even chop it by hand or put it in a food processor, and it'll be really good. If you want to season it up, do some breakfast sausage, something like that. So now that that is gone, we want to deal with what is called the membrane on the back. Some people call it silver skin, but on the back side here, there is this membrane in between the bones and what would be like internal organs and stuff. And so it protects the internal organs from that. But we want to get rid of that because after you cook these ribs, they can get kind of chewy and it's almost like a paper-like substance. So if you've ever tried to eat ribs with this on, it's like sometimes it almost feels like there's a piece of paper. So we're going to take it off. This is the easiest method that I have found. It's literally a butter knife, and you find the first bone, and you just get underneath that, and then I just twist, and that kind of releases that membrane. And each one is going to be its own little adventure. Sometimes they come off super easy. Sometimes they fight you a little bit more, but now I've got that loose, and you'll notice it's really slippery. So the best thing to do is to just grab a paper towel. And if you grab the paper towel and pinch it and then pull, it'll start to come right off. And sometimes you got to catch up from, get both sides going at the same time. There we go. Now, this is not something you want to keep. This is definitely a throw it away. There's no good flavor or redeeming qualities about that. That being said, I do know people who actually keep that on, and they'll cook it over high heat on charcoal as the finishing touch on their ribs. But we're not going to do that. We want that good bite. Now, again, if you want to leave it just as is, then you've got your spare ribs. However, We're going to do these to be St. Louis style. So we're taking off this section right here, and we're going to square these up. When you get into this flap, you can feel where the bones end. And so you're going to get a really good butcher knife or just a chef knife that's kind of heavy duty. And I'm going to go in between there, and you're just going to cut through that little bit of cartilage. And now we're starting to see the ribs take shape. And then at the end, there's this kind of awkward flap. Again, this is good meat, but it's going to dry out. So let me go over here. Just 1 second. Did I lose you guys? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Did I lose you for a second? Or did it stay going?
Stay going.
Okay. All right. So this part right here, that's all rib tips. So you can cook this up and it's very delicious, but I like to do it separate. I like to add some liquid into it. Asian marinades work really well with this cut. But again, it's totally acceptable to just keep that on. So now this is what a St. Louis style rib looks like. It's just the bones. There's none of the membranes. Now, if I was doing competition barbecue or something like that, I could go in and trim it even further to make it look prettier. But we're just doing this in the backyard. We're having fun. So I'm going to leave it. All this little bit of fat in here, that is all going to render. It's going to be very tasty. All right, so let's talk about seasoning. So again, we're using Meat Church. I really like it. You can get it online at meatchurchbarbecue.com or just meatchurch.com actually. They have a bunch of different flavors, but these are my favorite. Couple tips on seasoning ribs specifically. I always like to start on the back. The back of the ribs is the best place because we're going to flip it and we want the presentation side to be clean so it looks really good. So when you're seasoning, you want to stay up high. I like to be about a foot above and then just evenly shake and distribute across there. So we're doing a nice layer. I'm going to go back, get good coverage. And then I'm going to do a layer of the honey hog. So same process. This one's a little bit lighter, so it spreads out nice and fills in any spots that you missed with the other one. Now, good barbecue is, again, all about building those flavors, so don't be afraid to season pretty heavily. These are going to turn out awesome. Now, the other thing I was going to talk about is using a binder. Some people do that, so they might put mustard or oil or something like that on here. I don't feel the need to do that, just because when I'm trimming this meat is already kind of wet to the touch, which is a really good thing, and that means that all the seasoning is going to stick to it without using a binder. So I never use a binder. You can leave these, sit for about a half hour after you get them seasoned, just to kind of let that seasoning tack up a little bit. We don't have that kind of time today, so we're gonna just go after it. Season the other side. All right. One layer of gospel, one layer of honey hog, and then the beautiful thing about this is I got a little bit of overspray, as you can see. I usually just take my finger and kind of scoot it into the ribs, and then I can get the edges as well. So we're getting full coverage of all the seasoning. Now that is about as good as it gets as far as a well-seasoned rib. I don't know what all of you guys are cooking on, but I am doing this today on a pellet smoker, but the methods are going to be very similar across the board. And we can talk more specifically if you need to, if you guys have any specific questions to what you're cooking on, but I'll go through some of the main ones here in a second. And I see Doug is asking, do you need to brine the ribs beforehand? No, absolutely not. You definitely don't have to do that. Might be fun to mess around with, but most ribs have enough moisture and fat content inside that they're going to stay really flavorful, really juicy, regardless. As far as brining goes, I really like to do it with turkey and then some chicken, but most of the time it's turkey that I use brines with. Good question. Okay, now that that is done, let's talk about some of the different methods to cook this. So again, I am on a pellet smoker. I've got a Traeger. That Rectech, by the way, that's they're giving away. That is sweet. Get in on that. That's a really, really nice smoker. But basically, the technology for pellet smokers is really great now, and you can get one affordably. You don't have to spend $2,000, and they're just adding extra flavor. So if you have a pellet smoker, the one thing I will advise you on is you want to cook at lower temperatures to get more smoke. So typically on a pellet smoker, anything above 225, you're not getting smoke. It's more of a fire roasted flavor. So I like to do my ribs somewhere between 200 degrees and 225. But then if you're cooking on like a ceramic cooker, like a Big Green Egg, something like that, Kamado Joe, you can be up into the 250, even 275 range with your ribs, and it's still going to have plenty of smoke flavor. So I would say pellet smoker below 225. If you're doing like an offset or a Big Green Egg, 250 is like kind of where I like to be. And then even if you're doing these in the oven, you can do them at 250 degrees in the oven. But the method that I think is the best to start out with is it's kind of a variation on what is called the 3-2-1. It's really easy to remember. 3 hours of smoke. So I'm going to hit these for 3 hours at 225. And that's building flavor. Again, we're layering flavors. So now we're getting the smoke flavor on the ribs. Then I'm going to wrap them in tin foil, and I'm going to do that for 2 hours. Sometimes I like to back off that a little bit, but 2 hours is usually pretty safe. And then the one in the 3-2-1 is you unwrap them and put them back on the smoker for an hour. Now, this is the one that I like to change it up. Sometimes by the time they come out of the foil, they're already perfectly cooked and they just need to kind of set up again. So when you put them back on the smoker, what you're doing is you're kind of setting that bark again, because when you wrap them, it softens the bark a little bit. But yeah, sometimes it's as little as 15 minutes. Sometimes I let them run the whole hour. It's just about kind of figuring out what you want out of your ribs. And I would say if you want fall off the bone ribs, that 3-2-1, if you follow that 3 hours on smoke, 2 hours wrapped, 1 hour back on the smoker, that's going to give you perfect, like fall off the bone tender ribs. I want to speak to tenderness for a second because everybody kind of has their opinion, and what is considered ideal tenderness for a rib is what they call bite off the bone. So when you take a bite, the piece of meat comes off super easy, but the rest of the meat doesn't come with it. That's what I usually try to strive for. But again, if you like that fall off the bone tenderness, there's nothing wrong with that. Let it ride a little bit longer. It'll be fantastic. Yes, Dennis. 3-2-1 would definitely apply to an oven. It's going to be very similar. Just watch your temperatures. And the other thing I would suggest everybody, if you're into cooking at all, get yourself an instant read thermometer. This is the ThermaPen from ThermalWorks. This is kind of like the industry standard one. You don't have to spend a bunch of money on this. This one is about $100, but it is one of the best things you can have. There's other Amazon versions, things like that are cheaper. But basically the perfect like done temperature for most ribs is somewhere between 200 degrees and like 206. So it's like right in there is when you're going to get that perfect bite off the bone. So when you're cooking these and you get to that last hour, you can kind of check the temperature and see how they're going. There's also a visual kind of bend test that I'll talk about because I already cooked up one of these, so I wanted to show you guys kind of a finished product. As far as wrapping goes, I like to use foil for pork. It keeps everything super moist. It keeps the moisture in. Butcher paper is very common as well. That's a great method too. It's not going to stay as moist, but you are going to retain more of that bark on there. So if you really like a super bark heavy rib, that is a great way to do it. Also, if you want to do no wrap, you can absolutely do that too, and just run it straight through until it hits that 200 to 205 degrees. It's going to take longer if you don't wrap. So that's one thing is if you're already over 5 hours in, I like the wrap because it kind of helps move the cooking process along and retains moisture. So spritzing is another thing that I like to talk about. I have this really fancy spritzing bottle. It is apple juice in here is what I like to use with pork. Every 45 minutes that this thing is on the smoker, I'm just going to hit it with a little bit of apple juice. That is keeping basically the bark from drying out. Plus, it's building more flavor, so there's sugar in there. You can definitely use apple cider vinegar. Water even works, or come up with a fun concoction. I know people that use pickle juice and Dr. Pepper and all sorts of different things. Just make sure that you get a food-safe spray bottle. They're available at most grocery stores. It doesn't have to be a fancy one like this. It can just literally be a spray bottle and just spritz it every 45 minutes. That's going to keep everything going well. All right. Are there any other questions? At this point, I am ready to throw this into the smoker, but I've got one that's already done. So I was going to kind of bring that out and show you guys. Yeah. So Connor said that he's seen pineapple and orange juice to make like al pastor style, which is totally cool because al pastor comes from pork shoulder typically, but the flavor is going to be really similar. Yeah, that's really good. All right. Toss this one in. And then I'm grabbing this one out. Going to get it up front here. And by the way, welcome to my outdoor kitchen, guys. So if there is a fly or two flying around, we are outside. It happens. I'm going to change my gloves here. So that is what it looks like when you are done. I did add sauce to these. So in the last 10 minutes, I added just my favorite sauce. This is Pablo Honey. Really, really good barbecue sauce. Whatever your favorite sauce is, just toss it on there, brush it on, give it 10 to 15 minutes to kind of tack up. And then it gets really sticky and delicious, and the sugar concentrates, and it's fantastic. So I'm going to grab this and kind of show you guys what we're working with. Really, really, really delicious. All right. The best way to cut these, I'm going to show you guys the back. So if you can see the back of these, you can see exactly where the ribs go. You just want to take a knife and slice straight through that. So we're going to take that and set them up straight and just come on down. And there's so much flavor. Take a bite. That's what we're looking for. You want it to leave your bite mark behind. Oh, that is so dynamite. Yeah, I'm going to take one more bite because it's really good. And that's it. Ribs are really, really one of the best things to barbecue because they're very forgiving and they're kind of hard to mess up. And if you stick to the kind of 3-2-1 method, it's going to be great. That bend test I was talking about, you can kind of see how as I'm holding it, it's not falling apart, but the very top layer of that bark is starting to crack. So from a field test, that's a really good sign. All right. Cheryl asked, you don't need to season overnight. I don't need to season overnight. I've done it before. If you want to, you certainly can. That would be considered what's considered a dry brine. You could do it, the night before. You might get a little bit more flavor out of it, but I really just even what we did here today, that seasoning is going to really come through. It's going to be really delicious. The other thing I will say is in the wrap stage, you can really have fun with that by adding some more flavors into the wrap. If you've seen like competition barbecue, they'll throw some brown sugar and some butter and then put the ribs right on top of that and let it kind of just sit and marinate in that while it's in the package. Most of the time, I just spritz with a little bit more apple juice and then wrap them up tight. Maybe throw a little bit more seasoning on top just to, solidify that. But yeah, that's great. Nick. Yes. Awesome. Let's see what. Sorry, I gotta maximize. Yes, another thing. Once they're wrapped, if you don't want to continue running your smoker, you can move them into the oven because they're not getting any more smoke. They're not getting any more flavor. They just need that heat to help render some of that fat. So that's a great move, Nick. Yeah, and Nick said he let them sit wrapped and then finished in the oven. And yeah, did it on cherry wood. That's the other thing. Pork is so good with just about any sort of wood smoke. Fruit woods work really well. Cherry, apple. I'm a big fan of hickory. It's a little bit stronger, but awesome as well. The only thing I might say to stay away from is mesquite. Mesquite is a very strong smoke flavor, and it will penetrate the ribs and almost be overpowering. Oak is a little bit strong as well, but I do like ribs on oak also. Oh, we got photos. Look at that. Looking good, looking good. All right. Any other questions? We got kind of ran through her quick here, but I think everybody should be set up to go out and make some amazing ribs in the next couple days. Thank you, Keith. I appreciate it. Yeah. So if you guys need any other advice or think of questions later on, one thing that I offer anytime I teach a class, follow me on Instagram or any of the social media channels. It's BBQ with Boderman. I'm here for you guys. So the main reason I got into this is I've been grilling and cooking since I was a little kid. Really got into it. Loved having people over, showing my friends. They would always ask and call and, hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? And I thought, this is really fun. My main goal when it comes to food is to take some of that pretentious attitude out of it. And there's certainly plenty of it in barbecue, especially. So I'm here to share. I have no secrets. I will tell you everything I know. So if you're walking around the grocery store or something like that, and you see a cut of meat that you don't know what to do with, shoot me a message on Instagram. I love talking about this stuff. I get messages from students all the time, asking questions. How should they do this? What temperature should I do that at? And I love it. So thank you guys so much. I'm gonna put my Instagram into the chat here. Hold on one second. BBQ. Yes, and use that rub, Mike. Use it on everything. Again, on chicken, it's phenomenal. I'll just go buy a thing of chicken thighs and then rub them in that, throw them on the grill. Really, really good. So thank you, guys. And again, any other questions, shoot me a private message. I love it. Okay, Stan. 3, 2, 1 is a long time. The one thing I can suggest is bump your temp initially. So sometimes I'll go up to like a 275 and maybe do that for 2 hours. That's more if I'm using an actual grill, or, you know, if you're using the oven, you can do a hotter temperature. You could do 275 because you're not trying to get that smoke flavor. And then wrap them after that like 2 hour period. And if you wrap them, leave them in there for another hour or so. And you could even bump the temp to a little bit more. You could go 300. You're looking for a good, you know, bone pull through. You can see the end of the bone sticking out there. When you get to that tenderness, you know, just let them rest for 5-15 minutes before you cut into them. But you can make really good ribs really fast. You just have to be careful. You have to be careful not to overdo it and burn them. The reason low temperatures work really well is it's a gentle way to render that fat, and you get more juicy, tender flavor out of that. But I've had some really good ribs that were cooked in 2 hours, 3 hours. You just got to be mindful of it and bump your temperatures and make sure not to burn it. Great question, Stan. Can you par cook them? You can. One of the ways that I would recommend reheating these is if you have an immersion circulator, or, you know, doing sous vide. That's how I reheat all my barbecue. So technically, if you wanted to kind of par cook them a little bit, get the smoke on them, and then vacuum seal them, and then bring them up to temperature the next day, one of the ways to do that would be like a sous vide, and then kind of finish it off on the grill to get to that 200 degree temperature. You can do it. They might dry out a little bit. They're not going to be quite as juicy as if you do it all at once, but definitely pork is really forgiving. You can do a lot with it. So how long would it take on a charcoal grill? So I started doing ribs on a Weber kettle, a 22-inch, when I was like 13 or 14. And what you have to do is offset your charcoal to one side and then put the ribs on the other side. And I usually put a water pan underneath just to keep some moisture in that chamber. But I was able to keep it at 250 and still do the 3-2-1. But if you're going a higher temperature, I would say you could probably do them in 3, maybe 4 hours. That would be, yeah, Nick, about 3 hours is pretty common on the charcoal grill. I really do like that offset charcoal method though, so they're not getting direct heat. And then you can add in whatever like wood chunks or wood chips you want to on top of that charcoal to get some more smoke rolling. Yeah, Alex, the charcoal snake, he said the charcoal snake on a Weber is a solid technique. That's where you actually kind of create a line of charcoal on the inside with strategically placed wood along the way. So you get about half hour of smoke. And then once the charcoal reaches the next point that has wood in it, you get another half hour of smoke. And it's a really good way to keep a low temperature, but long cooking time. All right, guys. Anything else? I'm loving the questions. All right. Oh, we got more. There you go. Yep, that's the charcoal snake method there. That's awesome. that brisket? You doing a brisket in there, Alex? I love it. I'm actually teaching a class in person here in Minneapolis on Sunday. We're doing it's an extensive one. It's like an 8-hour brisket class. So I got to get there at about 5 in the morning and get the offset smoker fired up, and it'll be really fun. All right, guys. Anything else? Okay, Mike, great question. So Mike asked, he's always cut kind of a crosshatch pattern into, I'm guessing you're talking about the ribs, to get the seasoning into the meat. Where the crosshatch method is really effective is on a fat cap. So for example, if you're doing a pork shoulder that has a, 1/2-inch fat cap across, I usually will crosshatch that to kind of get more seasoning into there. It also helps kind of crisp up on some of the edges, which gives a really great texture, especially if you're doing like a pulled pork or something like that. As far as doing it on like a rack of ribs, I would say you definitely don't need to do that. The seasoning, if you layer it on good and thick, you're going to get plenty of flavor, and it's going to taste absolutely delicious. So awesome. Thanks for hanging out with me outside. It's really fun. All right, I'm going to give it another 10. Oh, yes. Room temp before cooking. Great question, Dennis. So most of the time when I'm cooking beef, I like to let it come up to temp because there's less food safety issues associated with it. That being said, you can definitely let ribs and pork sit out for half hour, 45 minutes just to kind of come up in temp a little bit. You don't want to take ice cold meat and throw it into a smoker. It's just not gonna cook quite right. So my suggestion is always, if you're taking your ribs out or you're doing a pork butt or something like that, get it out, get it seasoned, and let that seasoning sit on there for about a half hour, 45 minutes tops, and then go directly from that onto the smoker. When it comes to steaks, brisket, that kind of stuff, you can stretch that a little bit further. Sometimes I'll do, 45 minutes to an hour, just to let that beef come up to temp. But with pork, you got to be a little bit more careful. So I'd say maximum of about 45 minutes. And the other thing is, if you're trimming, you want to trim when the pork is ice cold. As soon as you get it out of the fridge, start going after it with the knife. Room temperature fat is really difficult to cut. So if it's nice and cold, it'll cut clean for you. You'll get nice clean lines when you're trimming, and not have to fight it so much. So trim, then season, then let that seasoning sit for a little while. Love it. Love these questions, guys. Anything else? All right. Unless I see anything else, thank you guys so much. Again, I'm here for you if you have any additional questions. It's tough to do in 40 minutes or whatever we had here to kind of give you all the ins and outs. So if you do think of other questions, definitely reach out, and you guys enjoy your evening, enjoy your weekend, get out there, cook outside, have fun, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. Again, that was so much fun to watch, and I learned a ton. Again, for everybody that joined us, thank you for the time. As a reminder, if anything on our PowerStore presentation today you saw value, let's sync up. Let's have a chat just to dive in deeper and see if there's ways that we can help out. Again, thanks so much for the time, and hope to be chatting with you again soon. Goodbye, everybody.